the Must-See Film Club.
Let's start at the end. The final title card of the 1996 film The Watermelon Woman reads, "Sometimes you have to create your own history."
Her name, the Watermelon Woman. That's right, Watermelon Woman. Is Watermelon Woman her first name, her last name, or is it her whole name?
That line is everything. It's not just a poignant theme. It is a literal instruction manual for how the film was made. The entire movie is an act of creation in the face of erasure.
Exactly, because the film we're talking about today, Cheryl Dunye's The Watermelon Woman, is officially recognized as the first feature film ever directed by an out black lesbian. And it's about a young black lesbian filmmaker, played by Dunye herself, who is trying to make a documentary about a forgotten black actress from the 1930s.
And here's the twist that makes that closing line so powerful. The 1930s actress she's searching for, Fave Richards, also known as the Watermelon Woman, never existed. Dunye invented her.
She invented her because the real historical records were a void. There was no one to find. So to tell a story about the absence of history, she had to first build a history that should have been there. It's an incredible premise.
It's a profound statement on archives and power. If the archive is empty, you don't just point to the emptiness, you fill it. You create the artifact. It's a solution, not just a critique. And in doing so, Dunye created not just a fictional history, but a very real landmark of cinema.
To really get why this was so revolutionary, we have to go back to the mid-1990s. This is the era of new queer cinema, a movement of independent filmmakers telling unapologetically queer stories.
But even within that movement, the stories were predominantly centered on white, gay men. Dunye herself has talked about looking through film history for figures she could identify with and finding, in her words, nothing but homophobia and omission.
So you have this young filmmaker in Philadelphia working at a video store trying to piece together a project. She's steeped in cinema, but cinema isn't reflecting her back, and she decides to tackle that absence head on.
And she does it on a shoestring budget, around $300,000. This is a classic indie story. It reminds me of the filmmakers we've covered before, like Godard shooting Breathless on the streets of Paris for $80,000, or Mambeti making Tuki Buki for just $30,000. It's that same spirit of necessity breeding invention.
But with an added layer of difficulty. Godard was revolutionizing cinematic language, but he was working within an established French film tradition. Dunye was trying to build a tradition from scratch. She was creating a cinematic language for an identity that had been systematically excluded from the screen.
That's a fantastic point. The historical context for Black queer representation was thin, to say the least. You had experimental works from artists like Marlon Riggs with Tongues Untied in 1989, or Isaac Julian's Looking for Langston from the same year. These were foundational, but they were often video essays or avant-garde pieces.
And in mainstream film, if a black queer character appeared at all, like Cleo and Set It Off, which came out the same year, 1996, they were often tokenistic, or their identity was buried under other tropes. What Dunye was doing was making a feature-length narrative that was warm, funny, and centered the everyday life, romance, and creative ambitions of a black lesbian character.
It's that warmth and humor that feels so radical. Paste magazine noted that it consciously moved away from the tragic narratives that often defined queer cinema at the time. This wasn't a story about suffering. It was a story about searching, creating, and living. The stakes were historical, but the tone was personal and relatable.
She had already been honing this style in her short films, a style she coined the Dunyementary, and The Watermelon Woman was the feature-length culmination of that unique vision. Okay, so let's define this term, Dunyementary. It's such a brilliant concept. What is it exactly?
It's a hybrid genre that Dunye pioneered. Think of it as a blend of documentary, narrative fiction, and autoethnography, or autoethnography. She plays a character named Cheryl, who is a filmmaker, just like her. The film follows her real-life friends and community, but places them within a fictional quest.
So it's self-reflexive. It's a film about making a film, which we've seen before. But what's different here is why she's blending these forms. It's not just a stylistic flourish, it's a thematic necessity. The documentary form gives her investigation a feeling of truth and urgency.
And the fictional part allows her to build the history that's missing. The core of this is the creation of Faye Richards, the Watermelon Woman. To make her feel real, Dunye didn't just write a backstory. She and artist Zoe Leonard created an entire physical archive.
This is the most incredible part of the story for me. They staged and shot a whole series of photographs of a fictional actress, making them look authentically from the 30s and 40s. These photos are so convincing, so beautifully crafted, that they look like genuine historical archives you'd find in a dusty archive.
They were so convincing that the photo collection, titled the Faye Richards Photo Archive, was later exhibited as a standalone art piece in the Whitney Biennial. People encountered these photos in a museum context, believing them to be real. The art project transcended the film.
It's like an artistic Trojan horse. You think you're looking at a recovered piece of history, but you're actually looking at a contemporary critique of why that history was never recorded in the first place. The photograph becomes the evidence of the crime of omission.
It's a perfect analogy, and Dunye weaves these photos and fabricated film clips into her documentary seamlessly. So as a viewer, you're completely invested in Cheryl's search for this forgotten woman. The reveal that it's all fabricated doesn't feel like a cheat. It feels like the entire point. The search itself, the act of wanting that history to exist, is what's real.
The Dunyementary style is ultimately a solution to an archival problem. When history is a closed door, you build a new door. This reminds me of how Ozu in Tokyo Story created his own cinematic rules, the low-angle static shots, the unconventional editing, to better capture the specific emotional truth he was after. Dunye is doing something similar. She's inventing a form to match her function.
And that form is inherently political. By playing herself and centering her own quest, she insists that the filmmaker's identity is inseparable from the history she's trying to tell. It makes the personal historical and the historical personal.
This brings us to the money. A groundbreaking, experimental film like this doesn't just will itself into existence, and how it got funded became a national story.
Right. The film's roughly $300,000 budget was pieced together, but a crucial component was a $31,500 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA.
And this was in 1996, the absolute height of the culture wars. The NEA was a prime target for conservative politicians looking to score points by attacking government funding for art they deemed controversial.
Enter Michigan Congressman Pete Hoekstra. He gets wind of the film, specifically a love scene between two women, and launches a public attack. He called the film patently offensive and possibly pornographic, and questioned why taxpayer money was being used to fund it.
I watched this movie. all right? 78 minutes. And I invite any of my colleagues to watch it as well. Describing this as art is using the term very, very loosely. I wouldn't show it to my parents. I wouldn't show it to my wife. I wouldn't want my kids to see it. And I don't think any of my friends would want to see it. And we paid for it.
This is wild. A small, independent film made with passion and a tiny budget suddenly becomes a talking point on the floor of the U.S. Congress. The controversy exploded.
It had real-world consequences. The grant Dunye received was from one of the very last rounds of NEA grants made to individual artists. The political pressure from controversies like this one effectively led the NEA to change its policies and stop funding individual artists directly for years.
That's a huge strategic shift. The risk of a single project creating a political firestorm was deemed too high, so they shifted funding to institutions instead. Dunye's film was both a beneficiary of a system and, inadvertently, a catalyst for its transformation.
And it didn't just affect production. The film's distributor, the nonprofit Women Make Movies, had also received NEA funding. The hostile climate forced organizations like them to rethink their entire business model, becoming less reliant on unstable government grants and focusing more on distribution as a revenue stream.
So the controversy created this strange dual effect. On one hand, it put a massive, unwanted target on Dunye and her film. But on the other, it gave the film a level of national visibility it would never have achieved otherwise. It became infamous.
Absolutely. While politicians were denouncing it, the film was having a stellar festival run. It premiered at the 1996 Berlin International Film Festival and won the Teddy Award for Best Feature Film. It won audience awards at Outfest and other major queer film festivals. The artistic community was celebrating the very thing the political establishment was trying to condemn.
It's the ultimate disconnect between artistic value and political utility. One saw a groundbreaking work of art pushing representation forward. The other saw a convenient weapon in a culture war, and the film was caught right in the middle. So this sets up two completely divergent narratives for the film's legacy. How do we reconcile them?
I think that's the central tension of its story. Narrative one is the political story. The Watermelon Woman, as a controversial object, a symbol of wasteful government spending on offensive art. In this version, the film is primarily remembered for the fight it caused.
And for years, that narrative was powerful. It shaped policy, and for some people, that's all they ever knew about the film, that it was that controversial NEA-funded movie.
But narrative two, the artistic and cultural story, is the one that has ultimately endured. This is the story of The Watermelon Woman as a landmark of new queer cinema, a canonical text in Black film history, and a formal innovation that gave birth to the Dunye-mentary.
And these two narratives were happening at the exact same time. It's winning the Teddy Award in Berlin while being debated in Congress. It's being celebrated by critics for its warmth and humor while being labeled pornographic by people who likely never even saw it.
There's also a third, more internal narrative. As we mentioned, Paste magazine pointed out the film's tone. By being a romantic comedy of sorts, and by focusing on an interracial relationship between Cheryl and a white woman, Diana, it was also subtly pushing back against certain orthodoxies within queer and Black filmmaking. It wasn't a story of communal solidarity against oppression. It was a messier, more personal story of love, friendship, and ambition.
Which makes it feel all the more real. The story isn't just about the grand historical search, it's also about navigating a new relationship, dealing with friends' opinions, and trying to get a project off the ground. The divergence is present even at the micro level of the storytelling.
Exactly. The conflict isn't just external. Cheryl versus the empty archive, Dunye versus Congress. It's also internal. Cheryl's personal life versus her professional passion. These competing tensions are what make the film so rich and why the artistic narrative has outlasted the political one.
And it absolutely has outlasted it. Let's talk about the film's modern context, because the last decade has been a period of intense canonization for the Watermelon Woman.
It's been remarkable to watch. It started around the film's 20th anniversary in 2016, when it was restored and re-released widely. Suddenly, a new generation had access to it, and the critical appreciation surged.
And the institutions of cinema started catching up. It was added to the permanent cinema collection at the Museum of Modern Art. Then, in 2021, a huge honor. It was selected for preservation in the U.S. National Film Registry by the Library of Congress.
Which is the official ledger of culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant American films. It's placing The Watermelon Woman alongside films like King Kong and Tokyo Story as a work that must be preserved for all time. The irony is palpable, given its origins in controversy over its very right to exist.
And then came the ultimate seal of approval for cinephiles. In 2023, it was released as part of the Criterion Collection. That's the movie world's Hall of Fame. Its inclusion solidifies its place in the canon and ensures its history, the real history of its making and impact, will be studied for decades.
Meanwhile, Cheryl Dunye's career has flourished. After years in the independent space, she made a significant move into television directing, notably hired by Ava DuVernay for Queen Sugar. She's since directed for major shows like Lovecraft Country, Dear White People, and Claws. She became a sought-after voice, bringing her unique perspective to mainstream productions.
And she's not done creating her own histories. Through her production company, she's developing adaptations of iconic Black queer literature, like Joelle Gomez's vampire novel The Gilda Stories and Audre Lorde's Zombie. She's still building the world she wanted to see back in the 90s.
It's the perfect full circle story. A filmmaker who started by inventing a history because none was available to her has become a foundational part of that history herself. Director Yanitza Bravo called the film required viewing, and now, with its place in the Criterion Collection and the National Film Registry, it officially is. The path from a controversial $31,500 NEA grant to permanent cultural landmark is complete.